Please welcome the Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform, Roseanna Cunningham.
Thanks very much, Mike, for inviting me to speak this morning. I think we should all take a great deal of pride in the fact that Scotland is the first country to actually publish a progress report on meeting all 20 Aichi targets. And, I do try always to begin with a positive note. There's a tendency in Scotland to do the private Fraser, we're all doomed approach to things, and to forget that there are many areas in which we are actually pushing ahead further and faster than lots of other parts of not just the UK, but Europe as well. There have been considerable challenges in developing the accounts of progress towards meeting these 20 targets. So I want to say an enormous thank you to the collaboration, advice and support from all of the organisations involved, many of which are represented here today. This reporting includes groundbreaking work on safeguarding the genetic diversity of wild and domesticated species. And the accounts will continue to be developed during 2018 and will contribute to the UK reporting on Aichi targets to the Convention of Biological Diversity in Egypt in November this year. At that meeting, the process of developing future targets to take us on to 2030 will begin. And although today is largely about existing targets, I suppose we all have to keep in the back of our minds that potential future work that will need to be done as well. The Aichi targets are wide-ranging in ambition and challenging in terms of delivery. We are making good progress with some, but we do need to have a final collective push with our efforts on some of the most challenging ones. Our reporting does show that we're on track with progress against 7 of the targets, with a further 12 showing good progress, but requiring additional collective action before 2020. And only 1 of the 20 targets, and that's to do with increasing financial resources, is moving away from the original target. And I'm going to hazard a guess that that is probably going to turn out to be quite similar to most other countries, given what we've been through in the last 10 years. That target, while we all know that resources continue to be very tight, I understand that the way it's being measured needs to be updated to look carefully at all the sources of funding supporting biodiversity, because at the moment it's quite narrow. So we want to look at private and voluntary sectors as well as central and local government. So this is very much in line with our efforts to ensure that supporting biodiversity and taking account of it in decision-making actually becomes a mainstream activity, not just confined to nature conservation bodies. Now, that doesn't mean we turn everybody and every organisation into a nature conservation body, but it does mean that we begin the process of getting them to be thinking about that in a way that perhaps hasn't been the case up to now. The next speaker, David O'Brien, the Biodiversity Evidence and Reporting Manager here at SNH, is going to go into a lot more detail on all of the targets, but I do want to take a moment just to highlight a few. Target 1 is just basically the awareness increased target. Now, many people in Scotland are aware of biodiversity, do want to ensure it's protected now and in the future. Surveys have shown that 65% of Scots are concerned about biodiversity, with over 500,000 people volunteering in projects to help nature. In this year of young people, 2018, it is fitting that we try and do more to inspire the next generation. So work to enable people to enjoy and learn about nature is being delivered by many organisations and community groups. SNH's grant support to John Muir Trust to promote and deliver the John Muir Award activity across Scotland resulted in 441 schools being involved, with 16,554 awards being achieved by pupils and staff, and 2,700 awards achieved by pupils who experience some form of disadvantage. Now, that biodiversity awareness at 65%, of course, is only measuring a very general sense of awareness. The 500,000 figure of people who are actually actively volunteering is probably, I feel, a better indicator of the extent of actual engagement, because that's what we want to engender. So getting the engagement up, I think, is going to be a kind of real key to that. The next target I just want to say something about is the 12th target, target 12, on extinction prevented. You know, on the top line for this, for my notes and for, I guess, what you're, you know, looking at, is that there have been no recorded extinctions in Scotland. And I have to say, when I read that, I thought, God, that's not setting the bar very high, because I do wonder about the unrecorded extinctions, the tiny beasties, the insects that may have disappeared, the things that we can't easily find and record, or haven't been able to do that. But no recorded extinctions in Scotland, you know, is better than us having to report that there have been extinctions. The fortune of species, of course, is mixed. Some species are doing well and some not so well. Waders, seabirds, upland birds and specialist butterflies are showing declines, while generalist butterflies, woodland birds and geese are increasing. So it is a very mixed picture. Focused action on priority species, for example, red squirrel, wildcat, pearl-bordered fritillary, golden eagle reinforcement projects, all have positive effects, as does the work on some of our rare plants. But we all know other species that need additional help. Even with focused action, some priority species are showing insufficient progress. For example, capercaillie, corn bunting, and corncrake. So we need to find new and more sustainable ways to help these species recover. And we will need to do this as part of the significant changes required post-Brexit to agricultural support mechanisms, because they have been key up until now to a lot of the work that we have been able to do. I want to say something about Target 15, ecosystem restoration. Increased collaboration with land managers has further strengthened our ability to deliver on restoration of our freshwaters and peatlands. And of course, that restoration work is incredibly important for biodiversity, yes, but incredibly important for our climate change targets. And as an example of where actually action in one place is having a multiplicity of positive impacts. The UK River Restoration Centre identified the Pearls in Pearl project, focusing on freshwater pearl mussels, as the best partnership project in the UK, and highly commended as a large-scale nature conservation project by the Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management. This work, I think, is a great example of how working on one specific species has led to much wider benefits for water quality, nature, and people. And I think that's important when we're going out to talk to people about biodiversity, that it isn't just about biodiversity. It often is about a great deal more than that. So, you know, when people look slightly quizzically at you, when you're waxing lyrical about, you know, managing or restoring a species that they may never have heard of, putting it into a bigger context, I think, can help them begin to understand the need for some of the work that we do. The increasingly ambitious peatland restoration programme is contributing to the EU 15% degraded ecosystem restoration target, and is a major contributor to the government's goal to deliver 250,000 hectares of restoration by 2032. It's an amazing, iconic Scottish habitat, lots of unique species particular to that, and as I indicated, it's also contributing to the government's ambitious climate change goals. So it's doubly important that we do that work. And one of the reasons for bringing all specialists together is to share your thoughts and ideas and what else needs to be done to deliver these targets. And I hope you've come armed with some good, constructive ideas. We also need to begin thinking about the work required post-2020, and it is fitting, given the leadership role that I've asked SNH to play on biodiversity, that Sally Thomas will be setting out some of the early thinking on this at the end of the day. As well as reporting on the Aichi targets themselves, we've recently published the second annual progress report 2016-17 on the route map to 2020. As you probably know, the route map identifies the large-scale collaborative projects that are needed to contribute to these Aichi targets. The report identified good progress on the 12 priority projects, 14 targets, and 79 actions. Highlights included the peatland restoration programme, as I've already spoken about, the Scottish Marine Protected Areas Network, now covering 22% of Scotland's seas, more than double the original target, launching the pollinator strategy for Scotland, and green space for health partnerships being established at hospital sites across Scotland. And that's an important indicator, again, of setting some of these into a broader context. At one and the same time, dealing with some issues about biodiversity loss, but going right across into public health as well. And again, able to set some of this into a much wider context. More work is needed on the creation of new native woodland and restoration of native woodland through development of deer management plans. Some work is already in train by deer management groups, and deer management is something we have to get right. We do have a group led by Simon Pepper looking at the range of deer management issues, but this does not mean that we can sit on our hands in the meantime. I am asking SNH to ensure that they are being robust and proactive, making use of their existing legal powers where necessary to promote and protect the public interest. And I look to the rest of the deer sector to step up and play their part too. I'd like to stress the importance here that it is not simply up to one sector or organisation to deliver on the Aichi targets, but we need to work together as Team Scotland and focus our effort over the next year or so to help move these amber Aichi targets to green. I'm therefore delighted to see the new delivery statements developed by Scottish Water, Crown Estate Scotland, Scottish Enterprise and Historic Environment Scotland, challenging others to develop delivery statements showing the intent of their organisations to up their game with regard to their biodiversity duty. And again, these organisations aren't simply looking at biodiversity in isolation, they're looking at it in a bigger context. Again, if you haven't gone and looked at some of these statements, please do so. There is some incredibly good work being done across the piece that people won't necessarily be aware of. In this year, the Year of Young People, I think it's also really important to engage with and enthuse young people about nature and the environment. Although I've got to say, in my role as Cabinet Secretary, enthusing young people doesn't look to be too much of a stretching issue. Mostly I'm pretty overwhelmed by enthusiastic young people who are wanting us to go further and faster. And I have developed a little line for all these wonderful young primary school students, particularly that I meet, that they are permitted to go home and nag their parents. This is an issue in which pester power is something that we definitely want to see, and that they're entitled to go home and nag their mums and dads if they think their mums and dads are not stepping up to the plate. So we've got an army of young people out there who are really capable of delivering fantastic messages for us in a way that perhaps is harder for us to do through any other medium, because they are standing in the kitchen, they are in the bathroom, they are in the living room, they're having the arguments with their mums and dads in a way that we cannot do on that day and daily basis. There was a reception for young people contributing to biodiversity at the Parliament on 7th March, organised by SNH. And I spoke at the event, and I have to say, I was absolutely delighted by the range of young people's groups attending and their infectious enthusiasm. We had never seen the garden lobby so full of people and positive energy. And I look forward to hearing about and receiving Reroutes Scotland's Youth Biodiversity Panel's recommendation report later this month. Before I close, I'd like to say something further about biodiversity. An awful lot of what is talked about at the moment is process. It's about developing and setting targets. It's about reports, interim reports, and metrics. And far be it from me as a politician to say that process isn't important. Of course, it is important, very important. But we've got to, above all else, keep our eyes firmly on outcomes too, on the point that we are aiming to make real changes to protect and enhance what we see, hear and feel all around us. It's not an abstract exercise. Biodiversity is what supports our existence. I know I don't need to preach to this audience, but it's a message we collectively need to ensure we are getting across as widely as we can, and that we are interpreting for people in a way that they can, even in their own domestic setting, contribute to. Yesterday, I visited leaf crops in pots, and we were talking about the capacity that they might have to begin a window box project that will have people in tenements without gardens, perhaps thinking that they have no access to do anything in terms of gardening or biodiversity, realizing that actually something as small as a window box can contribute. I think it's really important that we deliver messages in that way so that people feel they can be part of this and take ownership of it, even in the smallest possible way that might be imaginable. It's really important that we do get that message out there in a way that people can take on board and understand. Now, I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to stay all day to listen to the speakers. I'm sure you're going to find them informative, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you very much.